Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Canelé de Bordeaux. That's right, they said these crispy baked custards were impossible to make unless you use specially designed pans or molds. But you know what? They say a lot of things. So I tried it anyway, and it worked. It worked real good. So if you only remember one thing from this video, it's to never believe anything they say. Because using nothing more than your standard muffin pan, I was able to create one of the world's most unique and delicious treats. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with this very simple batter, which will begin with some all-purpose flour, as well as an equal amount of sugar. We're also going to toss in 2 egg yolks, and a big pinch of salt. And then we'll finish up with some real and pure vanilla extract, as well as a couple tablespoons of rum. Dark rum is traditional, but all I had was white, and it worked beautifully. And then, once all that's in there, we'll take a spatula and sort of mix and smear this into a smooth paste. And as you first start doing this, it's going to seem kind of dry, but you'll see, just keep smearing and mixing. And eventually it will turn into sort of a moist paste, which is basically what I have right here. And we will simply keep at that until we can't see any more flour. And at that point we'll stop and prepare the milk and butter mixture we're going to add to this. So let's head to the stove, where we will add some butter and whole milk to a saucepan that we'll set over medium-high heat. And all we need to do is bring this up to a simmer. But we're not going to cook it. As soon as that does start to simmer, and it looks like this, we'll go ahead and pull it off the heat and add it to our bowl, but in 2 additions. So what we'll do first is pour in about half, and whisk that in, and then add the rest. And the fancy culinary term for this is tempering. The theory being if we added it all at once, there might be so much heat that it might cook the egg yolk. So to play it safe, we'll add just about half, and stir that until it's smooth. At which point we can dump in the rest, and we will continue whisking until we have a very thin, very smooth batter. And if everything's gone according to plan, you should end up with something that looks like this. Okay, no lumps, and as I said, pretty thin. So that is looking just about right. And at this point we can move on to the key step in this entire operation, prepping our pan, which as I said earlier is not going to be fancy French Canelé molds, but simply a good old-fashioned muffin tin. And what we need to do to prep this is grease it generously with butter and this, beeswax. Oh yeah, that is the secret ingredient that makes the Canelé so magical. And you have to make sure you're using pure beeswax. Alright, this one was sold as a wood conditioner because it's for cutting boards. But check the label and make sure you're not getting anything else. Okay, it has to be pure food-grade beeswax. And depending on how it was processed and filtered, it can range anywhere from an almost clear to a golden yellow color. And you should find this at your fancier grocery stores, but if you can't, check the hardware store, since they often carry it. And what we'll do over medium heat is melt equal parts of that with butter. And as soon as that melts, we'll give it a stir with our pastry brush. And that's it. As soon as all that melts and we stir it together, it is now ready to remove from the heat and brush into our molds, or in our case, muffin tin. And we really do want to be generous here. Okay, so as the Louis Vuitton of how much to brush on, you're responsible for making sure the bottom is well coated, as are the sides all the way to the top. And by the way, I only did 6, because I didn't think there was any chance this was going to work. But in the blog post, I'll give you the recipe for 12. But anyway, we'll go ahead and butter and wax our pan. And when you're done, it should look something like this. And then once that's set, we'll go ahead and carefully ladle in our batter. And as usual, we will portion that as evenly as possible. And there should be enough to come up almost, but not quite to the top. And by the way, if you are only doing 6, I always think it's better to stay in the middle of the pan. But anyway, we will ladle in our batter, at which point these are ready for the oven. So at this point, we'll go ahead and transfer those into the center of a 450-degree oven, but only for 10 minutes. All right, we'll start them off hot. And then what we'll do after 10 minutes is reduce our heat to 375. And continue on at that temp for about 50 minutes or so, or until very well browned. Like very, very well browned. And at first glance it might look it, but those have not gone too far. Okay, it's absolutely critical they browned at least this much, otherwise you're not going to get that crispy crust. And as they say in France, a Canelé is not a Canelé without the crispy crust. And you'll see, even after baking that long, the centers are still going to have a little bit of softness to them. So the point is, don't be scared. Make sure these cook long enough. And then what we'll do at this point is let them sit for exactly 5 minutes before carefully removing from the pan and inverting onto a rack. And even though we're not going to get the fancy fluted edges because we didn't use the actual molds, I still think these come out looking absolutely stunning. And sure, there's some French pastry chefs with their nose in the air, but that's okay. They always look like that. And then speaking of the ones done in the actual molds, because of the way they're shaped, these usually end up with like a deep dimple in the top that I will simulate by simply poking them gently with my finger. And that's it. All we're left with is the hardest part, letting these cool down completely before we eat them. And while the insides are going to stay relatively tender, as these cool, that outside crust is going to get extremely crispy. And once cooled, they should sound a little something like this. And basically what's happened is that butter and beeswax has fused to the batter and created a crispy surface that you will not get in any other pastry, at least that I know of. But anyway, we'll let those cool, at which point we'll serve them up, maybe next to a pot of coffee. And let me go ahead and cut one of these open, and we will give you a little preview on what you have to look forward to, which is hopefully one of the more delicious things you've ever had. And it really is the contrast between that tender, rum-scented custardy part and that sort of chewy, crispy, crunchy exterior. It really is so unique. I mean, I really could have eaten like 4 of these, which of course I didn't do. And even though real Canelé are tall and thin, and these are sort of short and fat, to me that really didn't take away anything from these. So while arguably maybe not quite as beautiful, the fact that we can simply make these in a muffin tin more than makes up for that. So maybe after you finish watching this video, you can do a search and see what these are supposed to look like, and then decide if it's worth getting in the pan. But anyway, that's it. What may end up one day being called American Canelé. Or not, we'll see. But whether you buy the fancy molds or just use a muffin tin, I really do hope you give these a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.